My boss denied my promotion after I made the company millions, so I quietly doubled my salary. People like to say loyalty pays off. I believed that lie for 4 straight years. When I first joined the company, I thought I'd made it. Defense contractor, stable paycheck, respectable title, the kind of job your parents brag about to relatives they barely like. I was an engineer, fresh enough to be hungry, but experienced enough to know I wasn't supposed to rock the boat. So I didn't. I worked late, I took every assignment seriously, I accepted every learning opportunity that suspiciously didn't come with extra pay, and every year, like clockwork, my reward arrived in the form of a polite email and a 2 to 4% raise. Just enough to keep me quiet, never enough to change my life. By year 4, the math became impossible to ignore. My role had a ceiling, and I was already pressing my head against it. Promotions required time in seat, internal politics, and waiting for someone else to retire, quit, or die at their desk. At this rate, I'd still be scraping by comfortably a decade later, the corporate version of financial purgatory. So I did what ambitious employees are told to do. I spoke up. I asked about growth, leadership, management. I said I wanted to contribute at a higher level. I wanted responsibility. I wanted to prove myself. My manager smiled that calm, non-committal smile managers perfect in training seminars. "Let's put you on a project engineer role," he said. "Show us what you can do." That should have been my first warning, but I was optimistic, maybe naive, definitely motivated. The project was massive, high stakes, high visibility. I was suddenly managing 4 engineers, a designer, and 2 administrative staff, coordinating vendors, deadlines, budgets, and technical decisions that could not be wrong. This wasn't busy work. This was real responsibility, the kind companies love to give before they love to give raises. For a full year, my life disappeared. I traveled constantly. Test sites, customer meetings, vendor facilities. Weeks away from home turned into months. I missed birthdays, I FaceTimed from hotel rooms, I learned which airports had the cleanest bathrooms because I practically lived in them. I was gone over 100 days that year. And it worked. We didn't just deliver the project, we crushed it. The system we designed generated $1.6 million in sales in its first year alone. We secured a patent, the U.S. Air Force nominated our team, and we became finalists for Department of Defense Contractor Technical Team of the Year. They flew us to Washington, D.C., put us in a ballroom, handed us plaques, took photos. On paper, I was everything a company claims to reward. So when annual performance reviews came around, I wasn't nervous. I was excited. My evaluation came back 10 out of 10. Perfect score. I remember sitting there, heart pounding, already imagining the conversation. Promotion, senior title, a real raise, something that said, "We see you, we value you." Then I found out something that made my stomach drop. One of my team members, someone I personally liked and respected, had been promoted early to a senior position. Different manager, same company. And me? I got 3%, the same raise I'd been getting since year 1. I stared at the number on my screen like it might change if I blinked hard enough. It didn't. I scheduled a meeting with my boss immediately. I didn't go in angry, I went in prepared. I laid out the results, the revenue, the patent, the award nomination, the travel, the hours, the sacrifices. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded, and said something that permanently rewired my brain. "I don't think your team member deserved that promotion," he said casually, "but he doesn't report to me. You do." I waited. "That's it?" I asked. He shrugged. "Try again next year." That was the moment I realized something terrifying. Results didn't matter, sacrifice didn't matter, loyalty didn't matter, only control did. I walked out of that office feeling something shift inside me. Not rage, not sadness. Clarity. I stopped trying the very next day. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly. I worked my exact 40 hours and not a minute more. I stopped volunteering. I stopped traveling unless I genuinely wanted to. I used my vacation days. All of them. Sick days too. Fridays became optional. And something unexpected happened. My mental health improved. I slept. I ate properly. I remembered what it felt like to exist outside of performance metrics and quarterly reviews. But I wasn't done, because if the company wanted loyalty without reward, I decided to extract value instead. They had an education budget no one used, training funds that quietly expired every year. So I used them. And that decision, that one quiet decision, is what doubled my income and blindsided my boss. But before I tell you how I did it, let me ask you something. Have you ever realized you were being punished not for failing, but for being too useful to promote? Once you accept that a system isn't built to reward you, the smartest move isn't to fight it, it's to use it. I didn't announce my withdrawal. I didn't slam doors or update my LinkedIn with passive-aggressive quotes. On the surface, I was still the same reliable engineer. Inside, I'd flipped a switch. I stopped thinking like an employee. I started thinking like an investor. And the first thing investors do is look for underutilized assets. That's when I remembered the education budget. Every department had one, tens of thousands of dollars set aside for professional development, courses, certifications, specialized software training, the kind of thing executives loved mentioning during audits but rarely encouraged people to actually use. Most employees were afraid of it. Training meant commitment. Commitment meant golden handcuffs, and no one wanted to get trapped. But I was already trapped, so I dug deeper. Some courses required a retention agreement. If the company paid, you owed them 2 or 3 more years. Those were off limits. I wasn't stupid. But buried in the policy were technical skills classes with no strings attached, advanced finite element analysis, high-end 3D modeling, specialized tools companies paid top dollar for but rarely trained people in-house, skills recruiters searched for, skills competitors desperately needed, skills my company was too cheap to develop internally. I signed up. Around the same time, my coworker, the one who'd been promoted early, enrolled in an MBA program. The company paid for it, but it came with a long-term obligation to stay. He was excited. I was observant. We talked a lot, compared schedules, complained about workloads, traded notes on which managers actually approved reimbursements without drama. And then something clicked. While his degree tied him tighter to the company, my training did the opposite. We traveled together for classes, hotel conference rooms, week-long intensives, software labs where people whispered their salaries during coffee breaks. That's when I started hearing numbers that didn't feel real. Contract engineers billing hourly at rates higher than my annual bonus, specialists whose base salaries were more than double mine before overtime. People who didn't manage teams, didn't travel constantly, beg for approval. They just had rare skills. I kept my mouth shut. I took notes. I built a resume quietly, updated it in fragments, one certification at a time, one software proficiency at a time. I made sure every new skill aligned with job listings, not internal career ladders. Meanwhile, at work, my performance stayed adequate, not exceptional, not noticeable, just enough to avoid questions. I stopped being the solution, and management noticed, just not in the way you'd think. My boss started checking in more often, asking if everything was okay, if I felt engaged, if I needed support. I smiled, said I was fine, thanked him for the opportunity. Inside, I was already gone. About a month after the final training wrapped up, I started applying for jobs, not mass applications, targeted ones, roles that required exactly what I'd just learned, positions that mentioned overtime pay like it was normal, companies that treated engineers like revenue drivers, not overhead. The response was immediate. Recruiters called within days. Some sounded surprised I was even available. One actually laughed when I told him my current salary. "That's low," he said carefully, "for someone with your experience." The first offer came faster than I expected, then the second, then the third. I chose the one that made me sit back in my chair and stare at the ceiling for a full minute. The base salary alone was double what I was making, and it paid overtime. When I handed in my notice, my boss's face went pale. Not angry, not confused, afraid. "What happened?" he asked. "We just invested in you." I didn't correct him. He asked where I was going, how much they were paying, whether I'd give them a chance to counter. I told him the number. He laughed once, and then stopped when he realized I wasn't joking. "That's more than I make," he said. It was. And that's when he used the word that finally made everything clear. "Don't you feel any loyalty?" I asked. I thought about the nights in hotel rooms, the missed family time, the perfect performance score that meant nothing, the promotion that never came. "No," I said calmly. "I feel appropriately compensated." I walked out 2 weeks later. The following year, with overtime, my income tripled. Same industry, same skills, different rules. And suddenly the system that once ignored me couldn't stop asking how I did it. But here's the part no one talks about. The scariest moment wasn't quitting. It was realizing how long I'd been undervaluing myself.
I didn't expect the guilt to hit first. Everyone tells you that quitting a toxic job feels euphoric, like slamming a door and walking into sunlight. And don't get me wrong, there was relief. Real relief. The kind that lets you breathe deeper than you have in years. But in the quiet moments, something else crept in. Doubt. On my last day, people stopped by my desk with tight smiles and forced cheer. Some congratulated me. Others looked at me like I was committing a crime. A few asked, in hushed voices, what my new salary was. When I told them, their expressions changed instantly. Shock, envy, regret. And that's when the whispers started. A week after I left, a former coworker texted me a screenshot. It was an internal email, not meant for me, discussing unexpected turnover risk and retention challenges among high performers. I wasn't named, but everyone knew. The company scrambled. Management scheduled town halls. Executives talked about loyalty, teamwork, and long-term vision. New approval layers were added for training budgets. Suddenly, professional development required justification, sign-offs, and strategic alignment. Translation? They'd closed the door I walked through. My boss didn't reach out again. Not directly, but mutual contacts told me he'd been defensive, irritated, embarrassed. Apparently, someone asked him why a top performer with a perfect review left for double the money. He didn't have a good answer. Meanwhile, my new life didn't slow down. My new role felt surreal at first. No micromanagement, no justification for overtime. It was expected and paid. My manager asked what tools I needed and ordered them the same day. Not next quarter, not after approvals. That day. I wasn't managing people anymore. I was managing value, and value paid well. The checks hit my account, and I kept thinking there had been a mistake. I refreshed my banking app more times than I care to admit. The number stared back at me like a dare. This was real. I paid off debt I'd been quietly carrying for years, built an emergency fund in months instead of decades. I started saying yes to things without calculating the financial consequences first. Dinner out, a weekend trip, replacing things that were still technically fine. Wealth isn't about luxury, it's about options. That's when the irony struck me. I'd been told to try harder by someone earning less than I was now. I didn't rub it in. I didn't post salary screenshots or update my bio with passive-aggressive success quotes. But information travels. A former teammate called me late one night, voice low. "They're asking how you did it." Like, step by step. I told him the truth. I used the system they built. I learned what they wouldn't teach, and I left when it benefited me. He was quiet for a long moment. "They're mad you didn't stay loyal," he finally said. I laughed, not out loud, but internally. Loyalty had been their favorite word. They used it like a moral leash, something you owed upward, never downward. What they really meant was compliance. At my new company, no one talked about loyalty. They talked about deliverables, deadlines, rates, clear expectations, clear compensation. The contrast was brutal. 3 months in, my old boss finally reached out. It was short, polite, professional. He asked how I was doing. I said, well. He said they were still struggling to fill my role. Apparently, candidates wanted more money than the company was willing to pay. I almost replied with something sharp. Almost. Instead, I said, that's unfortunate. After I hung up, I realized something unsettling. If I'd stayed, nothing would have changed. No matter how many awards we won, no matter how much revenue we generated, no matter how perfect my reviews were. The system needed people like me to stay put, to perform, to produce, to accept just enough to survive. Walking away wasn't just good for me, it was disruptive, and disruption scares systems that depend on silence. Here's the truth no one says out loud. The biggest risk in your career isn't leaving too early, it's staying too long after you've stopped being valued.
Companies love to pretend they learn from mistakes. They don't. They patch holes, slap on new slogans, and hope no one notices the water still pouring in. About 6 months after I left, I heard the company had rolled out what leadership proudly called a retention initiative. Town halls, slide decks, carefully worded emails about valuing our people and investing in our future. The irony was almost poetic, because the future they were investing in didn't include actually paying people more. Instead, they introduced a new policy: tighter control over training budgets, longer approval chains for promotions, and mandatory career alignment discussions before any employee could apply for advanced certifications. In other words, they locked the doors. I heard this from former teammates who were suddenly being told their requests were under review or not aligned with business needs. One friend joked that the only skill the company wanted them to develop was patience. Another friend wasn't joking. She called me crying one night. She'd been leading a major project, months of overtime, weekend calls, constant pressure, and was promised a promotion pending performance review. The review came back glowing. The promotion didn't. The explanation sounded painfully familiar. Next year, they told her. I realized then that my departure hadn't scared them into change, it had scared them into control. Meanwhile, my own career was accelerating faster than I'd ever experienced. I was getting pulled into high-priority projects, the kind executives paid attention to. People actually listened when I spoke. My expertise wasn't questioned, it was requested. And the money kept coming. Overtime stacked up, performance bonuses hit. I watched my savings grow in a way that felt unreal. Not flashy, not reckless, secure. That security changed how I moved through the world. I stopped tolerating disrespect, stopped apologizing for boundaries, stopped pretending work was family. One afternoon, during a vendor meeting, I heard a familiar name. My old company. They were bidding against us for a contract. Same industry, same customer, same kind of system I'd helped design years earlier. I leaned back in my chair as they presented their proposal. It was fine, conservative, safe, outdated. When it was our turn, I spoke. Not emotionally, not defensively, strategically. I highlighted efficiency improvements they hadn't considered, cost reductions they didn't see, design optimizations based on the very skills my old company had paid to train me in, and then tried to lock away from everyone else. We won the contract. After the meeting, my manager smiled and said, "Good call bringing that up." Just like that. No politics, no ego, no gatekeeping. Word traveled fast. A former executive from my old company reached out under the guise of catching up. We met for coffee. He danced around the topic, praising my career move, subtly fishing for information. Finally, he asked the question he really wanted answered. "Would you ever come back?" I didn't answer immediately. Because here's the thing, I had imagined that moment, fantasized about it even, the power to say no, the satisfaction of watching them realize what they'd lost. But sitting there, I felt nothing. No, I said simply. It wouldn't make sense financially. He nodded slowly, like someone processing a loss too big to argue with. Later that week, I found out my old boss had been reassigned, not fired, just moved sideways, quietly, the kind of corporate consequence that looks like stability from the outside and stagnation from within. The company hadn't changed, it had just shifted blame, and I finally understood something that would have saved me years of effort if I'd learned it sooner. Companies don't reward sacrifice, they reward leverage. I had none when I asked for a promotion. I had all of it when I walked away. The fear I used to feel of being replaceable, of losing stability, was gone, replaced by something stronger, confidence built on numbers, not promises.
Revenge never looks the way you imagine it. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, no final email where I laid out every injustice line by line. The moment I'd once fantasized about, the one where my old boss finally understood what he'd lost, came quietly, almost invisibly. It happened at a conference. Same industries, same vendors, same polite smiles and expensive coffee stations. I was there representing my new company, wearing a badge that displayed a title I'd once been told I wasn't ready for. I felt someone staring. When I turned, I saw him, my former boss. He looked older, tired in a way that wasn't physical. His smile faltered for half a second before he recovered and walked over. We exchanged pleasantries, safe questions. How you been? Busy as ever. The usual professional theater. Then he glanced at my badge. His eyes lingered, and something shifted. So, he said carefully, I hear you're doing very well. I nodded. I am. He hesitated, then asked the question I knew he'd been carrying for over a year. Do you ever regret leaving? That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about him realizing that the power dynamic he'd relied on, the one where people stayed because they were afraid, no longer applied to me. No, I said. It was the best financial decision I've ever made. He swallowed. We talked numbers then. Not exact figures, but enough. Base salary, overtime, bonuses. The kinds of things engineers whisper to each other because they're taught not to say them out loud. I watched it land. The cost of my loyalty, the revenue I'd generated, the talent he'd dismissed. All of it added up in his expression. When the conversation ended, he shook my hand and said, You did what you had to do. And for the first time, I believed him. Here's what I learned, and what I wish someone had told me before I spent years proving myself to people who didn't need proof. Your employer is not your partner. They are not your family. They are a contract. When the contract stops being fair, you renegotiate. And if renegotiation fails, you walk. The company survived without me. Companies always do. But they lost something harder to replace than a job title or headcount. They lost precedent. Others followed. People started leaving, quietly, strategically. The training budgets tightened because leadership finally understood their mistake too late. As for me, I stopped measuring my worth by performance reviews. I measure it by what I'm paid, how I'm treated, and whether my effort compounds or evaporates. That shift changed everything. So, if you're listening to this while staying late at a job that keeps telling you next year, let me ask you one final question. If your loyalty isn't paying dividends, who is it really benefiting? Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't anger, it's financial freedom. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe now for more real-life money, career, and revenge stories, because the best payback is knowing your worth and getting paid for it.